Alright, in this video we are going to finally be getting around to the Viet Cong DH-10 directional mine. This was a early version of the Claymore mine that they employed in Vietnam. Reportedly this was kind of a response to US M18A1 Claymore mines that were being employed against them by special forces. Now, first off, a couple things I want to cover. Number one, which I know I got to put this out there more, address for the Patreon channel. If you like what I do, come on over to Patreon. I try to post links, sometimes articles and that stuff, to other things that I think are good to know for training. I try posting it over there every 2 to 3 days. Some days I fall behind. My goal is to have like a weekly topic and then try to post things related to that topic each week. This last month though, for June, it's been focused primarily on field chow, making stuff over a campfire, either in a mess kit. There's been a lot of stuff that's been linked to from Civil War cooking, stuff that was done by Union and Confederate troops. Second, a note for people that are wondering why I'm putting out so many videos like this on these different things from history. I'll just say that there is kind of a timeline that I think is in play right now, and I'm trying to get out some of this more really good to know information for if it may be needed in the future here. Those of you who might be wondering what that timeline is, well, if you have a Patreon account, you have access to a video that explains a little bit about that timeline or event that I consider is very likely to occur and when. Now, back into the main part of our video here. The Viet Cong DH-10 was first encountered in 1964. Now, this type of directional mine like this, there was 3 variants of it: the DH-3, the DH-5, and the DH-10. The DH-10 being the largest, the DH-3 being the smallest. The first one encountered was a DH-10. And its diameter was 18 inches. Now the little DH-3s, those were around 2.5 to 3 inches in diameter. The DH-5s were around 4.5 inches in diameter. And if you remember from the Viet Cong wooden claymore video, it was not uncommon that when these things were manufactured by the Viet Cong, they actually used to mark them as to what series of mine it was. They would put on some rudimentary markings showing with a little arrow, hey, point it this direction and stuff like that. There is some intel reports I came across that some of this stuff was manufactured in China and sent down into North Vietnam, and it was smuggled into South Vietnam. But there is a lot of evidence showing that the Viet Cong, for the most part, produced these on their own in the jungle and in workshops in the cities. I will attempt to post a link in the description from captured footage from the Viet Cong showing how they manufactured DH-10 mines. It's a clip inside a longer part of the footage that was captured. I'm going to try to get the timestamp adjusted so that when you click on it, it's going to start playing right before they show the how they assembled the DH-10s in jungle workshops, in their little arms factories out in the jungle. Now, generally, how these were, as you can see here, you had the concave front, a rounded front piece which was put inside what was looked like typically a cut piecing of a bomb, a US aerial bomb, or was a manufactured in the field tin circular outer part of the casing. They were soldered together in the field, it looked like in the video. Over that concave piece, or front piece, they had approximately 450 half-inch steel fragments, pieces of metal rod that they would cut in the jungle. These were put on in 2 layers, and they were covered in wax to hold them in place. They then would put on concave rear piece, and you had that cavity between the fragment and that rear shell piece. That was then filled with cast TNT, typically. And the TNT was taken from recovered unexploded US ordnance, primarily from aerial bombs. Now, when they cast the TNT, I'll make this note, because this does appear in US military manuals for improvised munitions. Do not take TNT, put it in a pot, and put the pot directly over a fire. You will cause the TNT to ignite and possibly explode. So the US Special Forces says to use what's called a double boiler. You have a double pot. You have one pot down at the bottom that you have water in that you heat up. That's going to be your heat source. And then you put that other pot that fits over the top of the one that has the water. It fits in it a little bit, so the bottom of that top pot is in the top of the water. As you're heating the water, that's what's taking the direct heat source. The water then transfers the heat to the top pot, which then melts the explosive, turning it molten, and then the Viet Cong would pour it into this cavity through a hole in the back here, which is right here. This is the back side of a DH-10. You see this hole in roughly the center. That was their pour hole. I did come across some pictures though that some mines, instead of having the hole in the back, they actually had it in the top. It kind of depended on the unit that was manufacturing these. The stands for them, as you can see, varied considerably. They could be just a couple pieces of metal rod or wire that were bent. They could be a little bit more substantial. Some scrap metal here that was heated, put together with solder, and then you had screws coming out the side of the mines for putting on a stand. And down here on this one, you have something even more substantial. If you look inside the leaves here, this almost looks like a pre-manufactured stand with almost a V-shaped, maybe a U-shaped piece of metal that comes up into here, is welded with a rounded metal cradle here that gets screwed onto the side of the mines. Now, I did come across notes. The DH-10 weighed approximately 20 pounds. It had one fuse well, which was either in the front of the mine or on the back side of the mine, with the back side being the most common. Its thickness overall, this way, was 3 to 4 inches. They did come across some homemade DH-10s which were down to 8 inches in diameter that were still marked as DH-10s, but the 18-inch seems to be the most common. The intended targets were troops walking through the jungle, like you see here, helicopters landing in rice paddies so that they would damage the helicopters and injure troops. I came across a lot of references that these were used against light vehicle convoys like your cargo trucks, your deuce and a halfs, your 5 tons, and against jeeps. And it was also referenced that it was used as a terror weapon inside the cities occasionally, where my guess is it would be used against masses of US troops that are in for R&R, possibly against police as they're out on patrols. Now the DH-5s and the DH-3s, these are the ones where I came across references that these were manufactured by the Chi-Coms, the Chinese communists in Red China. These were usually round like the DH-10s. They were smaller and they had 2 fuse wells. It was not uncommon where you would have one in the top and one in the back, or there would be one in the back, one in the front. Now the Chi-Com produced ones were typically TNT, or no, the filler was H6 or cast tryptanol, and around the fuse well, the cap well, the Chi-Com ones had a plastic explosive booster or approximately 200 grams of TNT as the booster charge. What a booster charge does, you have a lower order explosive in here, something that's not as sensitive. You put in a more sensitive explosive around the cap well. When the cap goes off, it detonates that more sensitive explosive, which then detonates the bulk of the charge. That's actually pretty common. Okay, some of the general performance data on this. For a DH-10, it had a range of approximately 200 meters to the front of the mine. The spread to its left and right, the cone would expand out to about 16 to 20 meters wide at the 200 meter mark. These were reportedly extremely effective against vehicles. That's actually the first way I found out about them, was reading on vehicle ambushes in Vietnam, and a lot of them referenced vehicles getting hit with the DH-10s. And then searching more into it, that's where I heard about the DH-5s and the DH-3s being encountered more in the jungle, being used against troops like the US Claymore. But reportedly they did use some DH-10s also if they thought they were going to get a larger target, say a company moving through the woods, or a platoon that's being stupid and gathering somewhere too tight together. Now this mine was actually copied by the Soviets. They turned this into a production mine, which I found that was done with a lot of the stuff the Viet Cong created in the jungle. It was first thought up and created in the jungle, and then other communist countries copied it. You see that with North Korea copying some of their hand grenades. You see that with China and the Soviet Union copying some of their mines. This one over here is not a DH-10. That is a Russian, possibly Soviet manufacturer, because this is from a museum, MON, MON 100. Now the MON 100, its diameter is 9.5 inches and it's approximately 3 1/4 inches thick. It has a range of about 100 meters, weighs around 11 pounds. Of that, 4.5 pounds of it is explosive. At 100 meters, its range, its spread is 9.5 meters. Now they did create a larger version, which is the MON 200, which is 17 inches in diameter, 5 inches thick, weighs approximately 58 pounds, of which 26 pounds is explosives. This is a MON 100, so this is the 9-inch diameter, and it gives you a good picture on what they had. You had the 1/2-inch steel fragments, which are honeycombed in here in the front, encased in wax to hold it in place, the explosive that's poured in over the top, and then the rear shell is put on and soldered in place. With the Soviet and Russian MON 100s and 200s, from the pictures it looks like instead of soldering the pieces together, they crimped them together because of manufacturing facilities, and that was an easier way to do it. And they had a pre-attached cradle on the mine that they could attach a leg to the bottom so that they could get the right height and move it back and forth for direction. With the MON 100 and the MON 200, it has one cap well from the pictures I have seen, and it's actually on the front of the mine. Like you would see, this is the way the mine is directed at you. With the MON 100 and MON 200, you would see the wire coming out the front of the mine trailing down. With the DH-10s, they typically did the way the US did. They armed it from the back, so you would see the wires coming down from the back. Now, the reason the US does that is how the charges are laid out. On US doctrine, you have a firing chain. You go from the point of initiation towards the enemy. So for here, our blast starts at this point, and then it keeps expanding outward, moving forward. So we're sending that blast going forward into the enemy. If you're going to detonate it from the front, well, then you're kind of sending your blast backwards. Well, how do you get around that? One way to get around that would be putting on a thicker, heavier shell on the back with a lighter one on the front, because the explosive force always travels the path of least resistance. Maybe that's what the Soviets did with the MON 100s and MON 200s. Maybe they put a thicker, heavier duty steel plate on the back and then had a lighter tin front on it. Maybe that's a little variation they did to allow for it to be have the cap well on the front. Why would they put the cap well on the front? Well, it would be a little bit more protected when it's in storage and transit inside the case, or flopping around inside a rucksack of the Soviet troop as he's at a jog or whatever to get to his ambush position for taking on NATO forces. I did want to manufacture a version of this to show you, that I could take apart and show you the steel fragments inside and that stuff, the cavity where the explosives would go and things like that, but I still do not have my workshop set up, and because of the timeline, I determined I should finally just get off my tail and put this video out for you. These would be easy to manufacture. I'm actually surprised it is not appearing more in guerrilla conflicts around the world, because it was a very devastating device. So, looks like that covers all the basic information I have down on the mines here. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.